There's a moment in this passage that feels uncomfortably familiar. Moses has gone up to the mountain. He's been up there for a while, right? 40 days to be exact. And the people of Israel are waiting at the bottom, just waiting, waiting with no update, no timeline, no indication of when this is going to be resolved. At first glance, right, it's patience. It's the kind of patience that feels noble. We trust God. We can do this. Then it turns into restlessness. Whew. The kind where you start pacing a little back and forth. Then anxiety sets in and the low hum of dread that makes everything feel uncertain. And then they move to action, but not the good kind of action, right? Now, Exodus 32:1 says, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. Make us gods who will go before us. Now, that word delayed is doing a lot of work here, because what the people are really saying isn't just, Moses is late. Come on. What they're actually confessing underneath the demand is this. We don't know what God is doing anymore. We can't feel him moving. We can't see where this is going anymore. And we cannot live in that uncertainty for one more day. And when they can't feel God moving, they decide to build something that they can manage. So that's the move for everyone. That's always what we do, right? Now, before we judge them too quickly, I want us to sit with how reasonable that impulse feels to us, because it's the same impulse that wakes us up at 3 a.m. running the worst case scenarios, right? It's the same impulse behind the spreadsheet we've built 5 different times. It's trying to plan our way out of uncertainty. It's the same impulse that makes us want to fix, that makes us want to solve and secure everything that feels like it might slip just through our fingers. But this passage isn't about a bunch of faithless pagans who forgot who God was, far from it. This is about what control looks like when the ordinary people are afraid. And that's all of us. That's all of us at one point or another in our lives. So let's back it up for a second, because context matters here. These were not uninformed people. These were not people who had grown up without any evidence of God. Far from it. They had evidence, abundance evidence. They were people who had witnessed miracles with their own eyes, who were talking about the 10 plagues, warning turning to blood, darkness at midday, death just passing over their homes. We're talking about the Red Sea splitting in two while they walk through on dry ground. We're talking about a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. A visible, tangible, you can't explain this away sign of God's presence moving with them through the desert. These people had receipts. They kept receipts. They knew God was real. They had seen him show up in ways that were undeniable, dramatic, and dare I say deeply personal. But now, God, man, you're quiet. It's quiet. Moses has been on the mountain for 40 days. There's no visible movement, right? No obvious sign, no burning bush, no parted water, no fire in the sky. The silence is real. It's extended. It's unbroken. It has a way of feeling like absence. It has a way of making the memory of what God did feel distant, almost mythological, like something that happened to someone else far in the past. I think a lot of us are living in that season that feels like that today. Maybe not a spiritual, dramatic crisis where you've walked away from everything. Maybe it's just a little subtler than that. Maybe God was clearly moving in your life a year ago, a few months ago. You could feel the momentum just going downhill, the direction, the clarity. And right now you're in a stretch where you're not so sure, right? The prayers feel like they're hitting the ceiling. The situation hasn't shifted like you were praying for, and you're starting to wonder if God is still in this. That's exactly where the Israelites were. And in that place, the temptation isn't to stop believing in God altogether. Don't do that. The Israelites never stopped believing in God. They didn't decide he was fictional. What they decided was that they couldn't trust him without the waiting. With the waiting. They couldn't live in the tension of not knowing, so they took matters into their own hands and traded mystery for management. Now, Aaron, he complies with their demand. He collects all their gold, melts it down, and fashions a calf. And then the people gather around and say something that should absolutely just stop us in our tracks. These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Hold on. A few chapters earlier, God himself parted the Red Sea, right? They walked right through it on dry ground. And now a cow made of melted jewelry is getting the credit for Exodus? Oh no. That's what control does. It doesn't just give you something manageable. Now, over time, it rewrites the story. It slowly shifts the narrative until the thing you can control starts to look like the source of your security. Because control gives you something you can see, it can touch, predict, and direct. And that feels safe. That feels like wisdom, even, right? It might even feel like maturity. But here is the problem: anything you can fully control, you will eventually trust more than God. Because it listens to you, it responds to you, it stays where you put it. It doesn't get up and walk away. You can take it out when you need it and put it away when you don't. God doesn't work like that, right? God moves, God leads, God stretches you in directions you didn't even plan for. God invites you. He doesn't obey you. And that tension between what we control and what we can't, that's not a design flaw in the life of faith. That's actually where trust is formed. Trust is built in the moments where everything is clear and nothing is uncertain. Trust is built in the waiting. Trust is built in the waiting, in the not yet, in the space between the promise and the fulfillment. The Israelites didn't want that space. They wanted certainty. They wanted a God that they could schedule, a God they could control. So they built something that didn't require faith. They just required proximity. And here's what makes this dangerous. The golden calf probably looked impressive. There was a ceremony around it. There was community built around it. There was a sense of collective relief and sighs. We did something. Finally, we solved the problem. We're not just sitting here anymore. It probably felt meaningful in the moment, but it couldn't speak. It couldn't lead. And guess what? It couldn't save. It couldn't transform a single circumstance, a single heart, a single situation. It was a decoration with a spiritual labor just slapped on it. It was a substitute. And here's the thing about substitutes: we get very, very good at decorating them until they look like the real thing. We're not melting down jewelry right now anymore, but we are doing the same thing, aren't we? We build our perfect routines that look like peace, but are really just anxiety with a better aesthetic. We curate our lives, our finances, our schedules, our relationships, right? Our media feeds, our presence, our everything, until it all just looks stable, until we look like we finally have it together. But underneath it all, that curation is just sometimes terror. Terror that if we loosen our grip for a single moment, something is going to fall apart. Some of us aren't bowing to golden calves. Not far from it, though. We're bowing to our Google calendars. We're not melting down gold. We're white knuckling every variable in our lives just so we can plan carefully enough, so we can think far ahead enough, and we can hedge every possibility risk with and outmaneuver everything. And again, I want to be clear: this is not a knock on planning. Planning is good. Wisdom is good. Stewardship is, you guessed it, good. God is not asking you to be reckless with your life and then call it faith. What I'm talking about is the posture underneath the planning. I'm talking about whether your planning is an act of faithfulness or an act of fear. Whether the systems that you help steward, whether the systems you help steward what God has given you, or whether they're secretly designed to make sure you never had to depend on God again. Because control can look exactly like wisdom. It can sound exactly like responsibility. It can even feel exactly like our faith. But if it's replacing dependence on God, if it is replacing dependence on God, if the real message underneath your decision making is, I'll handle this, God, I've got it from here, go take a break, then it's just a well dressed idol, man. It's more sophisticated than a golden calf, sure. It's harder to identify, absolutely, but it's the same thing at its core. So here's the question worth sitting with today. If everything in your life depends on your ability to hold it together, what happens when you can't? Because you won't always be able to. It's not pessimism. That's just the human experience, right? There will be a moment, because there's always is, when something just slips through your fingers, past your control, a diagnosis you didn't see coming, a relationship that just fractures despite your best efforts. Plans fall through. A season doesn't resolve the way you mapped it out or you thought it would, right? God never asked you to God never asked you to control your life. He asked you to trust him with it. Now, those are two very different assignments, right? Here's how God describes what happened when he speaks to Moses. They have turned aside quickly out of the way I commanded them. Oh, man. Notice what he doesn't say here. He doesn't just say they built something wrong, they built something bad. He just says they turned aside. They changed direction. They reoriented themselves. This is a navigational problem, not just a theological one here, because control doesn't always distort what you believe. It subtly redirects where you are going. It pulls you off the path degree by degree by degree until you look up and you realize you've been walking away from God's will for months, maybe years, maybe even decades, while feeling completely justified the entire time. You were being responsible, right? You were being smart. Yeah, you were doing what any reasonable person would do. I hear you. I feel it. And you were also quietly moving in the wrong direction. And that's what I'm here to tell you. Why does control do that, right? Because God's will requires surrender. It requires walking in a direction you haven't fully scoped out yet. It requires saying, I don't know how this ends, but I trust the one who does. And control cannot tolerate that. Control requires dominance over the variables. Control says, I need to see the whole path before I take the first step. And you can't live both ways at the same times. Eventually, one wins out. Either you learn to trust God in the uncertainty, or you build something that makes uncertainty feel manageable. One of those leads somewhere, the other one just keeps you busy. So here's what I love about this passage and about God in general. He does not, he will not abandon his people when they build idols. He confronts, yes. He grieves, of course. There are real consequences in this stories. Let's not sanitize that for a second. But even in the confrontation, there is an invitation. He doesn't write them off. He doesn't scrap the whole project, right? He re-engages. He calls them back. He stays in relationship with people who literally just replace him with a piece of jewelry. That's not soft grace. I'm getting worked up here. That's not permissive, look the other way kind of grace. That's the kind of grace and refuses to let you stay lost in what you've built. The kind of grace that says, I see exactly what you did. I'm not pretending it didn't happen. I'm not going to minimize what it cost. I'm still here. Come on back. That's what today is all about, guys. It's not about our guilt. It's not about a shame spiral. This isn't about cataloging all the ways you've tried to control your life, because that list is long for all of us, and it'll keep us here for most of Sunday. This is about the invitation that's been sitting in front of you, hand extended, because God doesn't need your control to move. Guess what? He's already moving. In your situation, in the silence, in the season that feels like he's checked out. He's never checked out. So the question here is not whether God is at work. The question is whether you'll trust him enough to loosen your grip on what you've built in the meantime while waiting. So let me ask you something very direct before we close this out here. No rhetorical ones, just real ones worth sitting with. Where are you trying to manage what God is asking you to trust? Is it your future? Is it your finances? Is it a relationship that feels like it's been unsteady for a while? Is it your calling, the thing that you know you're supposed to do, but you keep strategizing around because things just don't feel right? I don't got the right vibe, God, because you can't see how it'll work, because you need just a little more certainty before you actually move, right? Where have you said, even quietly, even just in the privacy of your own anxiety, God, you're taking too long, so I'll handle this one? Because that's the posture that this passage is confronting. It's not rebellion with a raised fist, it's impatience with folded arms. And it's something every single one of us has done and will do in the future. So here's the shift I want to invite you to seek this week. Instead of asking, how do I fix this? Start asking, God, where are you already working in this? That is the pivot. Pivot! From fixing to following changes everything. It's the difference between the golden calf and the burning bush. One is something you build when God feels absent. One is something you stumble into when you're paying enough attention to notice. So notice. What if you loosened your grip just a little this week, right? Not abandoning your responsibilities, not throwing wisdom out the window, just opening your hands instead of clenching them. Just creating a little space for God to move in the way that he always moves, which is rarely on your timeline, by the way, but it's almost always surprising and consistently better than what you would have built on your own, and I promise you that. God doesn't lead people who have everything figured out. He leads people who are willing to follow into what they cannot yet see. He's already out in front of you. Just trust him. Just trust him enough to let go. And all of God's children said, Amen.